Quote, "The defendant's duty to warn is a continuous duty which lasts as long as the product is in use. The defendant must continue to provide warnings at least so long as they are manufacturing and distributing the product." That's a quote from a California appellate case called Valentine versus Baxter Healthcare, which is the basis for California's Casey pattern jury instruction on the continuing duty to warn. Levine was, it's true, a post-approval duty to warn case, and the function that preemption would have served in Levine would have been to cut off that duty as of FDA approval. The argument was that post-FDA approval, regardless of new knowledge, additional information which came into the manufacturer, it could not have changed or improved its warning because it would have been in conflict with the FDA. So basically, the manufacturer's duty is shifted to the FDA, and the only duty that a manufacturer has post-FDA approval is a duty of silence, despite the knowledge it has. Now, that's a very extreme articulation of what is, in fact, a nuanced argument with respect to preemption. But that's what it comes down to. And because that would be the end result, I think we have to look at Levine and we have to look at the federal sources of this argument about approval superseding the duty to warn to see if, in fact, that argument has any basis. And that is exactly what the majority in Levine did. It looked very carefully at Wyeth's argument that they could not have improved the warnings for the drug at issue to talk more clearly or meaningfully about IV push because the FDA had looked at it and decided they didn't have to. What Justice Stevens says about that whole argument is that Wyeth's cramped reading of the CBE regulation and its broad reading of the FDA's misbranding provisions are premised on a fundamental misunderstanding. Wyeth suggests that the FDA, rather than the manufacturer, bears primary responsibility for drug labeling. But as the court points out, in fact, under the Code of Federal Regulations, it is the manufacturer that is, quote, charged both with crafting an adequate label and with ensuring that its warnings remain adequate as long as the drug is on the market. And those same regulations require a manufacturer to revise its label to include a warning as soon as there is reasonable evidence of an association of a serious hazard with a drug. So, as the Supreme Court is saying in Levine, the FDA itself and the congressional regulations place, quote, responsibility for post-marketing surveillance on the manufacturer. And with that responsibility for post-marketing surveillance comes this continuous or post-marketing duty to warn. So in fact, at least according to the Supreme Court's majority in Levine, there is no tension or conflict between prevailing tort law continuing duty and the impact of the approval process. The approval process does not divest the manufacturer of the duty and does not excuse the manufacturer from an affirmative duty to come back to the FDA with new information or data or a new understanding of old information and data and ask for approval of labeling changes. And in the meantime, until that approval is granted by the FDA, the manufacturer is not only free, but is under a duty to go ahead with those improved and enhanced warnings. There is no safe haven within the FDA for a gap between knowledge that the manufacturer has and a duty to meaningfully warn of that information. The old notion, tort notion of duty being based on knowledge is also expressly dealt with in Levine, where the majority points out that it's the manufacturer that has, quote, superior knowledge, close quote, of new hazards, new data that come in after approval. I think one of the misunderstandings of the FDA's role is that it goes out and continues to surveil drugs once they are on the market, and it does not. It does not have the resources to do it. It does not have the budget to do it. There is not a political mandate that be done. And the way the system is supposed to work is basically the honor system. The manufacturer knows about adverse events, the manufacturer is doing continuing studies, and the manufacturer will act at appropriate times on that. Not to say that that's not a tough duty, because no one is telling the manufacturer precisely when there's enough information to rise to the level of a new requirement for a new label or a new application to the FDA. That's a responsibility that's a judgment call that rests within the manufacturer based on that superior knowledge, and there are consequences for getting it wrong. And yes, the people who will decide whether it's been gotten right or wrong after the fact are going to be fact finders on a jury. That's the way the tort system works, and there's really, the lesson of Levine, I think, is that there's no exception here. There is no way to automatically cut off the post-marketing duty to warn through the mere device of obtaining approval. As we know, drugs and medical devices can have unintended, unexpected long-term effects. We, the public, are frequently the guinea pigs in ongoing epidemiological experiments. We all wish we were in the control group, but that frequently doesn't happen. And as between a manufacturer who is marketing and profiting from a drug and a governmental agency which is supported by taxpayer dollars, you can see the political argument that it's the manufacturer that continues to have that primary duty. So the whole battle over preemption has really been a battle to change that essential element of product liability law, whether it's articulated as strict liability or as negligence. It was negligence in Levine, and has, at least to date, not succeeded. Again, with the caveat that there are bound to be factual scenarios and circumstances under which it is found, or could be found, that a manufacturer discharged its duty, went to the FDA, FDA gets it wrong, FDA doesn't act, manufacturer decides reasonably that it cannot contradict an FDA warning, does not do so, and may take safe haven under those circumstances. Those weren't the circumstances as found by the trial and appellate courts in Levine, and I would argue they're not likely to be the circumstances found in most cases, but just given the nature of the duties at issue, the knowledge on which those duties are based, and the superior ability of manufacturers to collect the sort of data, including adverse event data, ongoing study data, that would give rise to a signal that there ought to be an enhanced or improved warning, means that both as a matter of the common tort law of most states and Supreme Court preemption law and agency regulation interpretation, that duty is alive and well.